I think the thing that I love about metal and about prog and this whole world is that you really can bring any music into it you want. Like there's no limits. And so we're kind of trying to do that. We're trying to like, well, why wouldn't this work? Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Stuart. My band is Bassoon, and we've been rocking this since the 2000s, like late 2000s. It's always been instrumental. Originally, it was a bit more in the kind of like stoner butt rock zone. If you listen to our first album, there's a little more. Even by the time we got out our first album, it was heading more in the progressive direction. It was probably most originally, you know, if it was going to be going in any kind of progressive direction, it'd be more like post rock, because there was. I was involved with Harvey Milk for a few albums, and the first version of the band was me on keyboard and Steve Tanner from Harvey Milk on bass. But eventually that changed to myself playing both bass and keyboards, and the current membership today. And then as time went on, and you know, metal changed, and you know, like technical metal got so varied and interesting that the stuff that we're doing now, I would say, is more crimson-y, but really there's a whole lot going on in there. You know, there's a lot of different. I mean, every song's pretty different. We just got back from a nice tour in the Midwest, and one of the things people were saying there was avant doom, which I thought was kind of interesting.
So yeah, the doom aspect of it, which is not a genre I'm so familiar with. It's a pretty new genre for me, as in the prog general category, because I listened to your new album, Succumbent, got to know it really well. I actually wrote a review, and I'm going to do a video review of it. I score it pretty high. It's a really excellent album. And I went and listened to your first album. To me, the first album didn't have the magic. Something was not there that this album really captures and is very cohesive. What do you think happened between the first album and the second album?
Well, this one's recorded a lot better. I mean, we did the first album ourselves, and put it out ourselves, and you know, and it's really like, it's not a first album like the first albums of like the Cars or something, where they've been like doing everything and working with all the great producers. It was really like our very first writing. So it's a little all over the place. There's like just complete stoner jams in there. There's like, and it starts to show some of the stuff that would blossom with the writing that made this album happen. So this album, on the other hand, the writing took place. So, I mean, that album came out in 2012. So each tune represents a lot more craft. They're much longer to write. They're extremely hard tunes to play and memorize. Yeah, I think it's just a far more ambitious album. It's really trying to bring in, I mean, I think the thing that I love about metal and about prog and this whole world is that you really can bring any music into it you want. Like there's no limits. And so we're kind of trying to do that. We're trying to like, well, why wouldn't this work? You know, why can't you have a kind of Alan Holdsworthian major seventh section in the middle of like some doom, you know, like, and then as far as prog goes, I would say that's one of the things we're trying to do that I think is new as far as technical metal and prog go, is that we're trying to bring in some of these like both straight up metal sounds and straight up kind of jazz sounds. So, you know, so it's a pretty ambitious thing, and, you know, and we're happy if it succeeds at all, because yeah, we're just trying to make ourselves happy.
Where does the ambition come from? How is it that you feel this need to do something so it's fresh and new for this album?
It's just hearing things and wanting to make them happen in this context, because it's such a, we all work in different fields. I mean, I'm probably the most pure rock, and I'm not very pure rock, but like I'm the most, I've done it the most. Part of it is having these musicians who can really access these different things. But it's also a challenge in the sense that it's really important to us that we can still go to like, you know, Louisville and Knoxville and play on a metal bill and have everybody be nodding their heads. So like, I think that's really what it is that, you know, it's not just that it's a challenge, it's that the challenge is how do you make it fun and like something that people will bang their heads to.
Yeah, I like that. That's great. You're keeping it grounded. You're being ambitious, but you're also, like you say, you want to go and play a live show, and people are still going to connect to it. It's not going to be too ethereal for them.
But I got to say, the crowds are incredible, though, like in the sense, and that's again one of the great things about heavy music is I think it's some of the most open ears. It's the most open eared audience out there. No question. You can go into the middle of nowhere. Not that Knoxville, not to imply that Louisville and Knoxville are nowhere, but you can go anywhere, and play this music, and people will come out, and again, if you're like trying to if your music is just trying to, lose people and trying to be like too smart for them, I don't know how that's going to go. But if on the other hand you're trying to work with this music that we all love and then bring people something new, they're psyched about it. And I got that very feedback. They're like, wow, you guys are doing something different. It's really cool.
A few years ago, I bought a metal magazine just out of spontaneously started reading some articles about different metal bands, and I was really impressed the work ethic of the metal genre. And a lot of these bands, they tour. They're very hardworking. They're very loyal to their fans. Fans are very loyal to them. There's a great rapport between the audience and the band, and that's really interesting. So would you say you're more rooted in metal than, say, rock, for example?
I'm a little older, and there was a period, what people I guess call the post-rock period, where you really didn't have to decide. You look at bands like Harvey Milk or like Jesus Lizard, or those are the Melvins. These are some bands that really you can't put them in a box. Even and post-rock itself as a label was pretty, was a pretty weak label. A label that is both shellac and like Don Caballero in it is a pretty meaningless label. So yeah, if anything, I think I don't know if I don't know what others' experiences are, and we got shut down by the pandemic pretty hard. So like we're just kind of hitting the road again. So I'm kind of just reporting on what I've seen. And also because Nefarious Industries is, it's a metal label, and that's the label that the album came out on, and they've been great, and they are very instrumental in setting up the shows. So I would say the shows had a doomier or thrashier bent, but I would say that for bands for us to play with, I feel like those set the stage better, in the sense that I like it when people are starting from metal and then like being like, whoa, this is, and seeing how far, we can take it in terms of like giving them new sounds to listen to, as opposed to starting from experimental music and then I don't even, I'm not saying I'd love to be on a bill with like a bunch of prog bands, nothing wrong with that. That just hasn't how it's worked out. But interestingly enough, we've never gotten that kind of blank stare where people are just like, like people are into it. We are really loud. So like there's, and we have a really big sound. So like there's nothing we can hang with these like big doom bands. So that helps.
Cool. Tell me a little about Nefarious, because this sounds like they're a supportive and good label.
Oh, Nefarious is incredible. Greg is incredible. Greg is a fantastic musician in his own right. He's collaborated with a bunch of bands, had his own bands. He really supports the bands, the artists, and what's more, it's a very broad label. While it has just really like super duper doom and heavy stuff, it's also got, in fact, the guy who made the connection, even though we knew each other before, Timo Ellis, he did something on that label that was just straight up experimental. There's bands like Bangladeshi that are, very, but I would say that the unifying link is that everything's kind of heavy, like I'm not, I guess metal is one way to say it. To me, it's like heavy music is maybe a better moniker, because it's like somehow all this stuff has to hit hard. That's like the main thing.
Right.
And that's how I ultimately, when I look to the past, like the closest band is going to be something like King Crimson, because they hit really hard, especially in the 70s. Like that's a heavy, or Rush, these bands that like really like got over as like heavy metal, or while still being super proggy, obviously.
You're an instrumental band, so is that something that's your plan? You're never going to have a singer, or did it just sort of work out? You couldn't find a singer and you decided to be instrumental, or?
I think a lot of bands that do things similar to us, like have one of the instrumentalists singing. It's rare that you have a band, that has like, like Yes or something is an example of a band that had a dedicated singer, but like these days, I think if a band's doing like really involved and intricate music and they have vocals, it's usually one of the instrumentalists doing the singing. Not always. Nequient, a band on Nefarious, I'm wearing this is their hoodie. They're a good example of like a very advanced band that has a frontman who like really like stirs it up and and really kind of makes the music happen. So I think the thing, and our music could handle vocals just because metal can handle pretty much anything. You can have vocals over anything. So, but it's really just that I used to sing in a band. I don't really like my voice. I have a hard enough job anyways, playing keyboards and bass, and the other guys don't sing. So it's more just working with what we got. I don't think it was ever like and we've at times we've talked with some people about maybe coming in and doing vocals, and it's just never played out. So that's something that we would consider in the future if we found the right person to work with, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little more about the current album. Why was there such a long break between albums? And also, you said it was a better produced album.
The break, there's not much reason for that other than just probably creative block and, just writing slowly and like these tunes. And I think that's one reason why there's so much diversity in the tunes, is that the tunes didn't write themselves. They all came out of a very specific impetus. And some of them, these are, the first two tracks in the albums are new for the album. So the music isn't getting written very fast. And, and I think I wish we would write faster, but on the other hand, I'm very proud of the diversity of what came out. So, and besides, you just can't rush those things even if you wanted to. So, but as for the recording, I got to work with the engineer on the recording, Tony Maimoni, with a different project. And it was just one of those things where I was like, everything, one of those things where you go into the studio and just the tracking alone sounds incredible. Like once you go back and you just walk right back into the studio and stuff is already sounding incredible. So I was like, okay, this guy's got to do our next. And he's another really interesting artist. In addition to being an engineer, he was the bass player for Pere Ubu for many years. Back in the 80s, he's done many, many different projects. Great bass player. I actually mixed our old album and was somewhat involved in mixing this album. And I really appreciate having somebody else's. There's really a space for artistry that comes in with the engineering and mixing. And Tony really took that on to make it that, especially with music like this, where there isn't singing, to make it that the various features that come and go pop out. It was like night and day, once he was done with the mix, just how much, because I think, a lot of metal is really just going to reproduce the live sound. And Tony really did more than that with this album. He really worked very hard on making the individual sounds pop out. And it's really mysterious to watch how he does it. I think it's just many years of experience and working on very cool things and very diverse things, all within rock, of course. I
mentioned in the beginning a couple influences, or maybe just to me, it just reminded me of like King Crimson, for example. Like I got into King Crimson when they had Discipline come out, and then they had Three of a Perfect Pair and stuff like that. And it's like you said, it's really hard hitting music. But the guitar was it's almost like a classical, when they have a violinist, who's leading the orchestra. The guitar is a star of some of the music. You're not the guitar player, are you? Or you're the bass player?
I play keyboards. So
right, you do bass and keyboard.
That's an important detail.
So tell me a little about the guitarist is Sean, right?
Yeah, Sean Moran.
Give a little shout out for Sean and maybe for John too.
Yeah, well, they're both just such incredible musicians that it's hard to know where to start. But I think what's interesting about both of them was the fact that when I met both of them through, creative jazz music scenes, not through the metal universe. And most of them, and those two spend most of this is the only heavy band they're in. And I think what's interesting about Sean in particular is that although when I first met him, I met him like at a show in New York. You know, I was just like, oh, well, what kind of stuff do you do? And he was just like, oh, you know, jazz, da 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 da, metal. And I was like, metal, you know, because at that point I was trying to find a guitarist, and so that made things easy. But I think what's interesting is that he comes from a more kind of like thrash and kind of classic metal background in terms of his listening. And I think that's one of the interesting things he brings to the music, especially when he does leads. He's really steeped in all that technique that is, you know, everything from Slayer to Randy Rhoads to all this, you know, all this stuff that like, at the time he had a Charvel, American-made Charvel, which is a great guitar, but then he actually had this really sick custom-made long scale, you know, Floyd Rose-equipped guitar. So he's really into the, you know, the metal sound, and, you know, and so, I mean, that's just really interesting because he's like a Broadway musician. He does like many different things. So it's, you know, but it's just interesting. He's another one who just gets really excited when it starts being about heavy music and things like that. And then John, you know, of course, the drumming in metal is extremely challenging, right? I mean, that's usually the hardest seat in the band. And that's saying something because sometimes the guitar parts are pretty tough. And John is somebody who, like, you know, early on, I would like send him something just to jam on, and I'd show up and he'd have it transcribed and be playing it more accurately than I was. Like, so he's just absurdly precise. You know, a fun fact about the album is that there's no click track. And we were able to do things like, you know, like if necessary, if we had to edit from one place to another, from one take to another, which is obviously something people do all the time, with John's tempo, it was never a problem, you know, with no click track. So he's really like one of those human machine kind of people, but he's also just, you know, a very sensitive musician, and hits really hard and just takes the music really seriously. It's just so much fun to be working with him. And I write all the music, with the exception of the third track on the album, which was written by Sean, and which I think brings a nice flavor because, again, it's got some more, it's got more shout outs to kind of, you know, kind of old school heaviness and stuff like that in it, while still being a very interesting piece. You know, the way I write it, it's a very nice way to work, which is I write out literally everything, including all the drum fills, and just hand them sheet music. And then it just makes learning it faster. And then the hard part is memorizing it, of course. But I mean, that's working with musicians of this caliber. It just makes it, that's one of the reasons why I think we can be so ambitious, is because we can use a score and you know, and get around having to kind of like explain what's going on. It's just like, well, just read the notes and then it'll eventually make sense.
And how do you go about playing keyboards and bass while you're playing live?
You know, I just get Eliot, right? You know, you have to like, I think that's a big, I mean, I was a huge Rush fan as a kid. I don't listen to him so much anymore, but I don't need to, because I listened to it so much as a kid that I pretty much all those songs memorized. That was something that drew me to Rush actually early on, was because before I was a bassist, I was you know, was taking piano lessons and was playing keyboards and stuff like that. So that was something that drew me to Rush early on, was the way that the keyboards, you know, especially on an album like Subdivisions was the album that drew me into Rush actually. And then I kind of went backwards, you know, because I was, you know, I guess I was in sixth grade when I bought that album, actually in Mexico of all places. And then I'd heard of Rush, and then I kind of went backwards from there and got all their albums up to there. And I never really listened to anything after that album, actually.
Subdivisions is an amazing song. That's one of my favorite songs by Rush, is Subdivisions. Yeah,
it's an incredible song, and it's, you know, it's one of these few songs in rock. It's really a very small number of songs in rock that have like a big fat keyboard pad on them, and that includes "Jump" by Van Halen. You know, it's just not that many, right? And I think that was the thing in rock, is that I always had a special place in my heart for these songs that featured keyboard, like even like that Boston song with the organ intro. I mean, there's all these like, and then of course, Yes had great keyboard parts and things like that. So I definitely, and that's actually something also that makes this album different, is that this album, every song has a significant keyboard part, whereas the first album, you know, a fair number of the songs are just guitar trio kind of stuff. And so another thing driving that was that It's a way of having another guitarist in the sense of having a bigger sound, because the thing about a trio sound is that it's a bit stripped down. It's like it's a good, it can be a big sound, but it's going to be that trio sound. Whereas I do really love the sound of like heavy music with two guitars, just in the kind of textures it can bring. So part of it is to get that going, and a lot of the keyboard sound design actually is around. I mean, I use a really funny keyboard. It looks like a normal keyboard, but it's actually a modular synthesizer in a hardware keyboard. And the reason why is that I need to do a whole bunch of manipulations to get a sound that I felt on stage could compete with guitar, could both blend with guitar and hold its own. And it's funny because they're all they're hand sculpted sounds and all this kind of stuff. But then what I noticed finally coming back to the album is that it really kind of sounds like Emerson, Lake and Palmer or something. Like it kind of sounds like heavy organ is what, and what a surprise. Like that the sound that is going to be most compatible with a guitar at the end of the day is something not far from the kind of like distorted heavy organ you hear in the 70s, even though that's not how I approached it at all.
Right. Yeah, I did think ELP a little bit. And so that's interesting. Do you when you use your sounds, I think it's the same way for guitars as well. I mean, I remember I was in a bedroom and I had my guitar sound in my bedroom. And when I came in a band in a studio with the drums and everything loud, I realized my guitar sound was completely inadequate and you had to kind of start from scratch. Is that sort of how you approach some of the keyboard sounds and the tones?
Yeah, I mean, it's that idea that like, yeah, that, it is really challenging, a guitar through a modern amp and and great pedals is a very well developed sound that can really, that a keyboard, that you buy some kind of like cheap nifty keyboard and it's just going to get destroyed. So originally I was using much more kind of classically powerful keyboards like a Jupiter 6, a Roland Jupiter 6 and things like that. And the idea behind the Nord is just to have one, to not have to carry a million pedals around because the Nord has a bunch of processing inside of it, but also to really to just be able to do anything I could think of in terms of being able to configure the keyboard for performance. Because that's another thing, is that like I have some very complex configurations to make it easy to switch from bass to, because I have to stop playing the bass on the dime and have the keyboard be right where I need it to be. So, so what the pedal does, all these kinds of things have to be very easy to configure. But in terms of the sound, a lot of it it's also the sound, the way that I amplify it, which is that it goes through its own guitar. I have a great Mesa Boogie Mark II 100-watt combo that both kind of the top end of the bass of the lows and the high end parts are going through. So it's like, it's really got its own stack. It's like a third instrument, in that regard, that it's got its own amplification and it's all necessary so that like when the guitar starts playing and the drums come in and the bass, because the bass is a big heavy bass sound too. So I think that's one of the things maybe that is most might be one of the most unique things about the live show, is that there's a fair number of passages that have the keyboard playing the bass. And the bass is this huge, heavy, distorted sound that's pretty much as hard hitting as the bass, and I think that's something that makes the show special. So the keyboards are a huge part of the sound in the band, even though it might not seem like it at first.
No, it doesn't, because I was going to think as I've been getting to know this Succumbent album, the keyboards I notice, but to me they're not out in the front too much. They really seem to be just playing more of a support role here and there. Tell me a little about your bass playing, and maybe for all the bass gearheads, if there's anyone watching who's a bassist, they might want to know what your gear is.
Well, my gear is very simple, just because most of what I'm going for is like a kind of classic, like I would call it like a 90s bass sound. Like I think one of the ultimate bass sounds was Jesus Lizard's bass player, and that's just like classic, like 810. And at that point, I think it was probably amp distortion. But like, I don't want things to be that out of control, so I'm using a pedal, but I just use the yellow Boss ODB. I mean, that's just a real classic. And then the real thing is the bass I have, which is a Kramer, an early '80s Kramer DMZ 4001 or whatever it's called, and it's an aluminum neck. It's an early, well, it's not that early because obviously it's not as early as the Travis Beans, but I feel like it has the right balance between something like a Travis Bean and a more typical P bass. So you get all that kind of like all the great high attack and stuff like that from a metal neck, but it's not, somehow it blends better with normal guitar sounds and things like that. Than Travis Beans are great, but I feel like and electric guitar company and all that stuff, but especially for bass, I feel like the sound can almost be, it's almost like it's got too much sustain, like there isn't enough drop off after the pick, so it doesn't have quite the same kind of percussiveness. And that Kramer is just such a wonderful instrument for that. I really wish I had two, because it's the kind of instrument that you could do a lot of different things. We're a C-tune band.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
We're tuned down to C. Both the guitar and the bass are tuned down 2 whole steps.
Oh, okay. So the guitar, instead of an E, it's going, oh wow,
It's a
C,
C.
D. Oh, okay.
That, by the way, that makes playing keyboard parts extremely challenging, because
Oh, yeah.
the bass and the keyboard are not in the same key at all.
Right,
So
right.
that's something
Yeah.
that takes some getting used to. And that's probably that's another thing that makes us different than your average prog band and more of a doom band, is that we're, like stoner, you have to tune to C because that's what Black Sabbath tuned to. And then, doom bands now tune to A. They go down a full fifth.
Okay.
And buy like longer neck guitars and stuff like that to handle the low notes. So we're not as doomy as all that, but we're on our way there. And I think that's another thing that lends us a heavier sound than a lot of bands doing proggier stuff, is that when we go down and like do like a heavy riff, it's like, it's Sabbath heavy. It's not like, that's how we're heavier than King Crimson or something like that, is that we're going considerably lower. And you get different sounds when you start going that low, like, the strings bend a little out of tune. I actually duplicate some of that with the keyboard patch. The keyboard patch has it that when I hit it harder, the notes bend out of each other for a bit and then come back. So you get that same.
Oh, yeah.
So these are all.
Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are all part of the little things that go into making it.
How did you find the label? Did they find you? Did you go looking for them? How did that all initiate?
No, it was through a guy named Tim Ellis, who has an amazing band called Netherlands. I don't know if Netherlands has put stuff out on the label, but he's done collaborations on that label. So he introduced me to Greg, although Greg was already aware, because I'm on a collaboration with Timo, a band called C that's on Nefarious, came out maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. Also with John Ellers of Bangladeshi and Brandon Seabrook. And that was just a fun, kind of one-off collaboration. It was through an introduction, but Greg, to his credit, as soon as he heard the music, he was like, "Oh yeah, this will work." And then from then on, I mean, he was a real partner in everything from like the album design to to the merch, to touring, to how to do promo and all that kind of stuff. So. They're just a very serious and passionate label, and it's been amazing.
I love the graphic design. Like, everyone, make sure you go to the Bandcamp page. You've got your new album there, sort of taking over all the colors, and really cool, vibrant colors. It's and the pattern, also the logo as well. The logo of your band's name, Bassoon, really cool. Did you have demos already then for the album that you played?
Yeah, we had it. We had it mixed already, in fact.
Yeah.
We had done all that. All the art, I'm the artist. I did all the art for it.
Oh, nice job.
And it was all new for the album. We had a pre-existing logo and a pre-existing look, and it was kind of like, it was such an exciting opportunity to try to present something completely fresh and new. Also, our first LP. So LPs are just incredible you have so much more area to work with. So I got a lot of work went into that cover, and the logo. A lot of work went into the logo. The logo, a lot of the stuff comes out is inspired by Islamic tile patterns, you know, and that's and it comes from the fact that we have a lot of tunes that are in 5 or in 7, and in fact, one tune is in both 5 and 7 at the same time. It's actually in 35 because it's, you know, it's 5 times 7. And so all the repeating patterns are either, you know, large septagons or pentagons. And the logo is based on like a diadem, or like, you know, or like a group of grape leaves or something like that. You know, so all of it came out of these different like tile patterns and things like that. But it was a chance to really like focus on getting, you know, a completely new presentation for the album, which was fun.
Yeah, I totally think it's very cool. I think you're going to sell a lot of merch. And
It
this
was
the
good on
albums.
tour.
Yeah, the albums are going to look gorgeous too in collections. You know, beautiful graphic design, really nice. I think that's really important too.
Greg was really, I won't say he was insistent. He was very encouraged. He's like, anything you can do to make these things more special is something that's going to make it more attractive to people, because, you know, that it just makes it a funner thing to own, you know.
Well, this is a great point to end. I've got 2.5 minutes left, and then I get kicked off of Zoom. I don't have the paid version, so, but this is usually perfect. You know, I find 40 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes is a really nice length for an introduction and getting to know a band. So I'm really, I'm very grateful to have met you. And speaking of gratitude, I guess it's Thanksgiving down there in the States today.
Yeah.
We
Where
had
are you?
ours. Where I'm in near Vancouver, so we had
Vancouver.
ours a month ago in Canada. It's a month earlier than you guys. So, you know, have a great Thanksgiving. And there's actually more I would like to get into at some other point, but I guess we'll have to save it for another interview. It's a fascinating band, a great trio. I know you've got some visions for maybe even expanding it, but the music's great. The album is great. Things are looking up for you, in my opinion.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, it's exciting and fun talking to you.
Make sure you check out the links below for the band, for the new album, which is Succumbent, and they are Bassoon. When we were talking to Stuart. Oh, I forgot your last name again. Stuart Popejoy. I got it.
What's that bass you have back there?
It's a fretless. It's a Yamaha, I think.
Oh, Yamaha, nice.
Yeah, it's a Yamaha.
Oh, those are great.
I got it used. Oh, I love fretless basses. Yeah.
Yeah, and Yamahas are, they're so playable.
Yeah, I've had a few.
I have a fretless. I have an old ESP Fender Jazz fretless.
Oh, yeah.
That was actually my first bass that I bought for myself. I was all into Jocko in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Big
Yeah,
Jocko.
I also wanted to get into that, but we ran out of time. I was going to ask what your early influences are, but like I say, maybe we'll have another interview in the future,
Sure.
eh?
Anytime.
Right. Okay, take care, Stuart.
Thanks.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.